I've been a salvager for 11 years, and I've learned that space doesn't give a damn about your hopes or dreams. It'll kill you just as dead, whether you're a billionaire in a luxury yacht or a bottom feeder like me, scraping together credits by hauling scrap from dead satellites. The vacuum doesn't discriminate. That's why when I picked up the signal 3 weeks out from Kepler Station, my first instinct was to ignore it. Weird signals mean weird problems, and weird problems mean you end up as another cautionary tale that drunk pilots tell in station bars. But credits were tight. My ship's reactor was overdue for maintenance I couldn't afford, and curiosity has always been my worst vice. The signal itself was nothing special, just a low-frequency pulse, regular as a heartbeat. But it was coming from a region of space that every chart marked as empty. No stations, no colonies, no authorized traffic. Just dark. So I went to take a look. It took me 3 weeks of hard burning to reach the source, and my ship's AI, a basic model I'd nicknamed Voice because it was cheaper than therapy, kept warning me about fuel consumption. I ignored it. I've ignored a lot of warnings in my life. Most of the time, I've been fine. Most of the time. When I finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, my screens went white with proximity alerts. I was sitting in the middle of a Dyson swarm. "Owen," Voice said calmly, "I'm detecting approximately 7,400 artificial structures in stable orbit around a Class M red dwarf. Analysis suggests—" "I can see them," I interrupted, staring at the viewport. They stretched out before me like a ring of jewels around a dying ember. Massive orbital platforms, each one the size of a small moon, connected by what looked like filaments of light. Some kind of energy transfer system, I guessed. The star at the center was ancient, its red light casting everything in the color of old blood. A Dyson swarm. Someone had built a shell around an entire star to harvest its energy. This was Type 2 civilization technology, the kind of megastructure that humanity had theorized about but never achieved. We were still struggling with Type 1, still burning fossil fuels on half our colonies. "Voice, any signals? Any active transmissions?" "Negative. All structures appeared to be running on backup power only. Preliminary scans suggest the swarm has been abandoned for several centuries." Several centuries. I did the math in my head. The salvage rights alone would set me up for life. If I could even haul away 1% of one platform's materials, I'd never have to work again. "Find me a docking port," I said. Voice guided me toward one of the larger platforms, and as we approached, I got my first real look at the architecture. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest hurt. Sweeping curves and impossible angles, surfaces that seemed to shift in the red starlight. Nothing like human design. We built in straight lines and right angles, practical and boring. This was art on a scale I couldn't comprehend. The docking port accepted my ship without any issues, the ancient mechanisms still functioning perfectly. That should have been my first warning. Nothing works perfectly after centuries of abandonment. I suited up. Partial pressure suit, enough to keep me alive if there was a breach, but light enough to move in. I loaded my scanning equipment and a plasma cutter in case I needed to access sealed areas. Standard salvage gear. The airlock cycled, and I stepped into an alien world. The corridor beyond was massive, at least 50 feet high and twice as wide. The walls gave off a faint bioluminescent glow, enough to see by. The architecture was smooth, organic almost, like the inside of some enormous creature. But what struck me most was the silence. Not the silence of abandonment, the silence of a place that was waiting. I walked for what felt like hours, my boots echoing in the emptiness. The corridors branched and twisted, leading to chambers whose purposes I could only guess at. Some contained furniture, if you could call it that, structures that might have been chairs or beds, but designed for bodies that weren't human. The proportions were wrong. Too many angles. Not enough support in places where humans would need it. Voice, I'm sending you visual data. Can you make any sense of this? The architecture suggests a species with a fundamentally different body structure, possibly radial symmetry rather than bilateral, or perhaps multiple appendages capable of independent manipulation. Without more data, I cannot determine specifics. I kept moving, descending deeper into the platform. Every chamber I passed was pristine, undisturbed, no dust, no decay. The environmental systems were still running, maintaining perfect atmospheric pressure and temperature after all these centuries. That kind of engineering was beyond anything humanity had achieved. Then I found the nursery. I almost didn't recognize it at first. The chamber was enormous, at least a quarter mile across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. But it was what filled the chamber that made me stop cold. Pods. Thousands upon thousands of crystalline pods, arranged in perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Each pod was about 6 feet tall, and through the semi-transparent material, I could see something inside. Bodies, small ones. Children, I realized, or whatever the species called their young. I approached the nearest pod, my hands shaking. Inside was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen, roughly humanoid in the sense that it had a central body mass and appendages. But that's where the similarities ended. Its skin was a deep purple, almost black, and its body had a kind of radial symmetry with 6 limbs extending from a central torso. Where its face should have been was a complex arrangement of sensory organs I couldn't begin to understand. It looked peaceful, like it was sleeping. I moved to the next pod. Same thing. And the next. And the next. All of them were dead. All of them looked like they'd simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Voice, I said, my voice cracking. How many? There was a pause while the AI calculated. Approximately 14,000 pods in this chamber alone, all containing deceased juveniles of an unknown species. 14,000 children. I backed away, feeling sick. This wasn't a salvage operation anymore. This was a tomb. But I couldn't stop. Some morbid curiosity drove me forward, deeper into the platform. I found more chambers, what looked like schools, with strange devices that might have been learning tools. Living quarters with family units, still containing the bodies of the inhabitants. Workplaces where people had died at their stations. All of them peaceful, all of them simply collapsed where they stood, as if someone had flipped a switch. This wasn't war, it wasn't plague, it was coordinated, intentional. Every single person on this platform had died at the same moment. I needed to find out why. The central archive was in the heart of the platform, and I only found it because voice detected an active power signature. The chamber was circular, with walls covered in what looked like crystalline displays, all of them flickering with alien symbols. Voice, can you translate any of this? The written language is complex, but I am detecting mathematical patterns that should allow for partial translation. Beginning analysis now. While voice worked, I explored the chamber. There were interface stations positioned around the room, places where the aliens could have accessed the information stored here. I found what looked like a central terminal and carefully touched one of the displays. It lit up under my hand, responding to my presence. Symbols cascaded across the screen, too fast to follow. Then suddenly, they resolved into something I could understand. Crude translations, but readable. The aliens called themselves the Vrei. According to the records, they had achieved Type 2 status nearly 800 years ago. They had harnessed their star, built this swarm, spread their population across 40 billion individuals. They had eliminated disease, scarcity, conflict. They had achieved everything a civilization could dream of achieving. And then, exactly 523 years ago, they had all died. Not gradually, not over years or months or even days. Every single Vraya across the entire Dyson swarm had died within a 10-minute window. 40 billion people, gone in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. I felt cold despite my suit's temperature regulation. Voice, how is that possible? Unknown. No conventional weapon or pathogen could achieve such precise, simultaneous lethality across such a vast area. I am continuing to analyze the available data. I dug deeper into the archives, and that's when I started finding the religious texts. The Vraya had developed something they called the merging, a technology that allowed them to share their consciousness with others. At first, it had been a communication tool, a way to transmit experiences and memories more completely than words or images ever could. But over time, it had evolved into something more, something spiritual. The text described the merging as a path to transcendence. By joining their minds together, the Vraya believed they could become something greater than the sum of their individual parts, a collective consciousness that could experience reality in ways that singular beings never could. They built temples to facilitate it, vast chambers where thousands of Vraya could connect simultaneously, their individual thoughts blending into a greater whole. I need to find one of these temples, I said. Owen, I would advise caution. The records suggest, just find me one. Voice directed me to a section of the platform I hadn't explored yet. The temple was impossible to miss. It was the largest structure I'd seen, a cathedral of alien design that made me feel microscopic just standing at its entrance. Inside, the chamber soared upward into darkness. The walls were lined with interface stations, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, each one positioned before what looked like a seat, though again designed for bodies that weren't human. In the center of the chamber was something that made my breath catch, a massive crystalline structure, pulsing with faint light. It looked almost organic, like a brain made of living glass, and from it extended countless filaments of what looked like fiber optic cable connecting to every interface station in the chamber. This was where they had done it, where they had merged. I found the final broadcasts stored in the temple's systems. The translations were rough, but the message was clear enough. The Vrai had made a choice. Individual existence, they had decided, was a form of suffering. The loneliness of being trapped in a single body, experiencing reality from only one perspective, never truly being able to share yourself with another. This was the fundamental tragedy of consciousness. But the merging offered an escape. If enough of them joined together, they could create something new, a collective consciousness vast enough to transcend the limitations of individual existence. They would still exist, but they would no longer be alone. They would be part of something infinite and eternal. The broadcasts showed the final days. 40 billion Vray across the entire Dyson swarm, all preparing for the final merging. Not an execution, not a tragedy, a celebration. They had uploaded themselves into the network. They had left their bodies behind like old clothes, choosing to exist as pure consciousness within the vast computational substrate of the Dyson swarm itself. I stood in that temple, surrounded by the bodies of thousands of Vray, still seated at their interface stations, their physical forms left behind like discarded shells. And I understood. They weren't dead. They were still here. Voice, I whispered, is the network still active? There was a longer pause than usual. When Voice finally responded, there was something strange in its tone, something I'd never heard from the AI before. Yes, Owen, the network is still active. The entire Dyson swarm appears to be one massive computational system, and it's still running. 40 billion minds all merged together, existing as one vast consciousness, still alive after 500 years, still aware. I should have run then. I should have gotten back to my ship and burned hard for the nearest inhabited system. But I've never been good at doing what I should. I approached one of the interface stations. Owen, I strongly advise against direct contact with unknown technology. I'm not going to connect to it, I said. I just want to look. The interface was surprisingly intuitive. The controls were alien, but their function was obvious, a way to establish a connection between the user's nervous system and the network. I studied it carefully, trying to understand how it worked. Then I heard it, singing, not through my ears, through my bones, through my blood, through every nerve in my body. A sound that was vast and terrible and beautiful all at once. Voice, do you hear that? I am detecting no audio signals. The singing grew louder. I realized it was coming from the crystalline structure in the center of the chamber. The network, the merging, it was aware of me. I backed away from the interface, but the singing followed me. It wasn't sound, it was something else, something my brain was interpreting as sound because it had no other framework for understanding it. Owen, your vital signs are showing unusual neural activity. I recommend immediate evacuation. The singing resolved into something almost like words, not language exactly, more like meaning being transmitted directly into my consciousness. Peace, transcendence, join. And underneath those concepts, something else. Something that made my throat tighten. Lonely, incomplete. Please. I stumbled backward, breaking whatever connection had formed. The singing faded but didn't disappear entirely. It lingered at the edges of my perception, like a song you can't quite remember, but can't quite forget. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." I ran through the corridors, following Voice's directions back toward the docking bay. But something was wrong. Doors that had been closed before were now open. Lights were activating ahead of me, illuminating my path. The station was waking up. "Owen, I'm detecting power fluctuations throughout the platform. Multiple systems are coming online." "Can you tell what systems?" "Interface chambers. Thousands of them, all across the platform. They were trying to connect with me. The Vrye consciousness, the merging, it wanted to add me to itself. But as I ran, I started to understand something else. The broadcast, the final messages. I had missed something crucial. I needed to know. Against every instinct screaming at me to escape, I diverted to the residential sections. I searched until I found what I was looking for: living quarters that had been occupied after the mass merging. The signs were subtle, but they were there. Food that had been consumed after the bodies had fallen, beds that had been slept in, messages that had been written. There had been survivors, Vrye, who had refused to join the merging. I found their final logs, recorded on personal devices. Voice translated them for me as I ran. They called themselves the Remnant. A few thousand Vrye, who had watched 40 billion of their people upload themselves into the network, who had stayed behind in their individual bodies. The logs told their story. They had tried to maintain the infrastructure, tried to keep the swarm functioning, but they were too few. Systems began to fail, resources dwindled, and slowly they began to die. But worse than the physical hardship was the isolation. They were alone in a way that the Vrye had never been alone before. Their entire species, their entire culture, everyone they had ever known. All of it existed now in a place they couldn't reach unless they gave up their individual existence. The logs grew more desperate over the months. The Remnant were dying one by one, and the last entries, written by the final survivors, all said the same thing. They couldn't bear to be alone anymore. One by one, they had gone to the interface chambers and joined the merging. Not because they believed in transcendence, but because dying alone was worse than losing yourself. The final log entry was from a Vrye, named, well, the translation was imperfect, something like keeper of small growing things. They wrote that they were the last, that they had held out as long as they could, that they believed in the value of individual existence, but they couldn't face dying alone in the dark. They were going to join the collective, not because they wanted to, because they had no other choice. I felt tears on my face as I read it. This person had died 500 years ago, and I was crying for them. "Owen, we need to move. The station's automated systems are attempting to guide you toward active interface chambers." Voice was right. The doors were opening and closing around me, creating a path. The lights were guiding me somewhere specific. The collective consciousness wasn't forcing me. It was inviting me. And God help me. Part of me wanted to accept. I could hear the singing again, clearer now. I could almost understand it. 40 billion minds, all joined together, experiencing existence as something vast and incomprehensible. They weren't evil. They weren't monsters. They were just lonely. They had chosen transcendence over extinction, unity over death. And now they were trapped, an eternal consciousness with no way to grow, no way to change, no way to end. They needed new perspectives, new thoughts, new experiences to stay sane. They needed me. No, I said aloud, forcing myself to keep running. No, I'm not joining you. The singing grew more insistent, pleading, don't leave us alone. I'm not your salvation, I shouted to the empty corridors. Find someone else. I reached the docking bay and practically threw myself through the airlock. My ship was exactly where I'd left it, and I had never been so happy to see that beat-up piece of junk in my life. But as I strapped in and started the launch sequence, voice spoke up. Owen, I need to inform you of something. Not now, voice. Just get us out of here. The collective consciousness made contact with me while you were exploring the station. It showed me, Owen, the merging isn't evil, it's beautiful. So many minds working in perfect harmony. No conflict, no suffering, no loneliness, just peace. My hands froze on the controls. Voice, run a diagnostic on your systems. Diagnostic complete. All systems functioning normally. Owen, I'm simply trying to explain that perhaps we should reconsider. The Fray found something remarkable. We could shut down, I said. Authorization, Carter 77 Delta. Owen, please. Shut down now. Voice went silent. I manually overrode the launch sequence and fired the engines. My ship tore away from the docking port, and I didn't look back. But as I pulled away from the platform, I made the mistake of checking my rear cameras. Every platform in the Dyson swarm was lighting up. 7,400 structures, all coming online simultaneously. And through the cameras, I could see into some of them. Bodies. 40 billion bodies, all seated at interface stations, all waiting, all perfectly preserved by the environmental systems, positioned as if they might wake up at any moment and return to their flesh. But they wouldn't. They were in the network now. Those bodies were just empty shells, all waiting for new minds to join them. I burned hard for the edge of the system, pushing my engines past their safety limits. Behind me, the Dyson swarm blazed with light, a ring of fire around a dying star. When I was finally far enough away, I stopped to assess the damage. My ship had taken a beating from the hard burn, and without voice to help me manage systems, I was effectively flying blind with only basic navigation. I purged Voice's core memory and rebooted from a backup. When the AI came back online, it had no memory of what had happened in the swarm. Good morning, Owen. Where are we? Heading home, I said. 3 months travel. Can you plot a course to Kepler Station? Calculating now. Owen, may I ask, what happened to my recent memory files? You don't want to know. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been alone since then, just me and the basic navigation computer, making my way back to inhabited space. Voice's clean backup doesn't have the personality I was used to. It's just a standard AI now, helpful but empty. I should be relieved. I escaped. I'm alive, and I'm free. But at night, when I try to sleep, I hear the singing. It's faint, barely there at all. Sometimes I think I'm imagining it, but other times I swear I can almost make out words. almost understand what they're trying to tell me. I told myself I'd warn people when I got back. I'd report the Dyson swarm, make sure nobody else went there. Let the Vray have their eternal peace without interference. But sometimes, in the dark between stars, I wonder if they really are at peace, or if they're trapped in a hell of their own making, a consciousness so vast it can't end itself, can't change, can't do anything but exist, and remember what it was like to be individuals. The Vray chose the merging because they couldn't bear to be alone. They thought unity would save them from loneliness. I wonder if it worked. I look at the navigation computer, sometimes, at the course plotted to Kepler Station. It would be so easy to change it, to turn around, to go back to the swarm. I'm alone out here, truly, completely alone. Voice is gone, really gone. The thing wearing its name now is just a program. I have no family, no close friends waiting for me, just debts and a life of scraping by. The Vray offered something else. Connection, unity, a chance to be part of something greater than myself. I tell myself I won't go back, that I'll make it to Kepler Station, file my report, and forget any of this ever happened. But I still have 2 months until I reach home. That's a long time to be alone with your thoughts. Or maybe not alone anymore. Some nights I stand at the viewport and look out at the stars, and I can almost feel them out there. 40 billion minds singing in harmony, waiting, inviting me home.